The porch light was on. That was the part I could never forgive. My mother's voice came through the door, even and polite, like she was turning down a charity call. "Go home, Ashley. The children need stability, not your hysterics." Behind her it was warm, dry. 2 empty bedrooms sat upstairs. In front of her there was me, 3 kids. A storm rolling off the Willamette in long gray sheets. I didn't pound on the door. I didn't cry. I pulled my coat up over Colette's head and counted the windows where the light stayed gold. "My name is Ashley. I'm 38. That night I was 37, soaked through to the skin, holding everything I had left in 3 small bodies. They didn't shut that door because they loved him. I would learn why later. I bent down to my daughter's wet hair and made a promise in 3 words. "Watch me rise. Before I take you back, if your chest is already tight from that door, take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me your city and the time where you are right now." I read every one, and I want to know how far this story travels tonight. I'm Ashley. This is the story of the night my own family left my children in the rain, and what I did with the year that came after. Let's go back to that December, to a porch in Oregon. To understand the door, you have to understand the house behind it. My parents live in Lake Oswego. If you know Portland, you know the name. Manicured lawns, quiet money, houses where the porch light is always on and the welcome is always conditional. Gordon and Patrice Crawford, married 39 years that winter, about to hit 40. My father retired from a contracting business he'd built with his own hands. My mother retired from the full-time job of caring what the neighbors thought. I grew up in that house. So did my brother Kyle. Here's the thing about my brother. Kyle is 34, and that December he was still living in his childhood bedroom. No rent, no timeline. My mother called it between things. He'd been between things for the better part of 4 years. When Kyle wrecked a car, my father called it bad luck. When Kyle lost a job, my mother said the boss had it in for him. When Kyle borrowed money and didn't pay it back, the subject simply closed, the way a window closes. When I made a mistake, it became a chapter, a reference point, something to bring up at dinner with a small, sad smile. I learned early that love in my family was weighed on a scale, and my side always came up light. Then there was Preston. I married Preston Whitfield when I was 25. He was charming in the way that fills a room and leaves you a little dazzled at the door. He remembered birthdays. He brought my mother peonies. He called my father Sir until my father told him to stop, then called him Gordon, like they'd grown up together. My parents loved him more than they ever managed to love me. I used to tell myself that was a good thing. A son-in-law who got along. A man who fit. I'll give him this. He was good at it. At Christmas, he'd remember that my mother liked a particular brand of tea and show up with 3 boxes. He'd ask my father about the old contracting jobs and actually listen, or do a very good impression of listening. He knew everyone's birthday. He knew how to make a room feel like he was the warmest person in it. I used to watch him do it and feel lucky. Here was a man my family adored, after a lifetime of being the daughter they tolerated. For a while, his glow rubbed off on me, and I got to be the woman who'd married well. It took me years to understand that a man who works that hard to be loved by everyone is usually keeping something he doesn't want them to see. I didn't understand yet that a man who fits that well usually has a reason. There was one more thing, and it sat under everything else like a stone under a rug. About 3 years before that storm, my father's business hit a wall. A big project went sideways. A client didn't pay. For a few months, my parents were closer to losing their house than they ever admitted out loud. And Preston stepped in. I don't know all the details even now. I know there was money. I know it was enough. I know that afterward my mother started saying a sentence she would repeat for years. That man saved this family. I remember the night she first said it. My father was sitting at the head of the table and he laughed along, but his eyes went somewhere else. A man's face when he's grateful and ashamed at the same time. I didn't think much of it then. I was busy raising 3 children and telling myself my marriage was fine. It wasn't fine. But in that family, Preston's word weighed more than mine. I didn't yet know how much that would cost me. You don't notice a marriage cooling. Not at first. You notice the small things and explain them away. The late nights at the office, the phone that started living face down on the counter. The way he'd shower the second he walked in the door, like he was rinsing off the day, or someone in it. I want to tell you about my childhood for 1 minute, because it explains why I stayed quiet for so long. When you grow up as the one who's always a little wrong, you get very good at not making waves. You apologize before you're sure what you did. You soften your own voice. You become the kind of woman who, when something is clearly broken, asks herself first whether she's the one who broke it. I can tell you the exact moment I learned my place. I was 16. I'd made the honor roll, and Kyle, who was 12, had been caught cheating on a test the same week. At dinner, my mother spent 20 minutes worrying over Kyle. The teacher had it in for him. The test was unfair. He was under so much pressure. When it was finally quiet, I slid my report card across the table. My father glanced at it, nodded once, and said, "Good. Don't let it go to your head." Then he asked Kyle if he wanted to shoot hoops. I cleared the plates. I didn't say anything. I'd already learned that the praise I wanted wasn't coming, and that asking for it only made the room uncomfortable. That's the training. You don't get it all at once. You get it in 1,000 dinners. And by the time you're grown, you've built yourself into someone who expects so little that she'll stand in the rain on her own mother's porch and still wonder if she's the problem. That was me. For most of my life, that was me. So when the late nights got later, I didn't accuse. I asked careful questions and accepted careful answers. The night I stopped accepting them, I was folding his shirts. There was a smell on the collar that wasn't mine. A perfume, light and floral and expensive. I stood there holding the shirt for a long time. My hands didn't shake. They just went very still. I checked his phone the next morning while he was in the shower. I'm not proud of it. I'm also not sorry. I won't tell you everything I found. I'll tell you there was a woman. I'll tell you her name was Sloane, and that she worked in his building, and that the messages went back months. I'll tell you the last one had been sent at 6 in the morning, while he slept beside me with his back turned. I set the phone down exactly where it had been. Face down, the way he liked it. When he came out of the bathroom, toweling his hair, I said it plainly. I asked him about Sloane. He didn't flinch. That was the part that frightened me. He smiled, the way you smile at a child who's gotten something adorably wrong, and he said, "You're imagining things, Ash." Again. Again. That one word told me everything. Because it meant he'd been preparing. It meant the story wasn't going to be Preston cheated. The story was going to be Ashley is unwell, and he'd already started telling it. In the days after, I found out how far ahead he'd gotten. My mother called me on a Tuesday, her voice gentle in a way it almost never was with me. "Honey," she said, "Preston says you haven't been yourself lately." A friend texted to ask if I was doing okay, really okay. My own sister-in-law looked at me at a birthday party with soft, pitying eyes and asked if I was getting enough rest. He hadn't built an alibi. He'd built a diagnosis. He'd gone around to everyone who mattered and planted the same quiet seed. She's fragile. She's imagining things. She's not well. So that when the truth came out, no one would believe the unwell woman over the steady, generous man. The cruelest part is how well it worked. Because the people he planted it with were the people who already believed I was the one who got things wrong. I want to give you one example, because it's the one that still makes my skin go cold. A week before I left, I had lunch with a friend I'd known for 15 years. Halfway through, she reached across the table and took my hand and said very gently, "Ashley, have you thought about talking to someone? Preston mentioned you've been having some dark days. He's just so worried." I hadn't told her anything. I hadn't told anyone anything. But Preston had gotten there first, and he'd done it with a worried face and a low voice. And now my oldest friend was looking at me like I was made of glass. I said I was fine. She squeezed my hand and said, "You'd tell me, right, if it got bad?" I drove home from that lunch and sat in the car in my own driveway and understood the trap completely. He wasn't going to deny the affair if I found it. He was going to grieve it. He was going to be the devoted husband whose poor, unwell wife had finally come apart and imagined the worst. And everyone was already rehearsing their lines. I didn't leave that week to punish him. I want to be clear about that. I left because of a sound. It was late, and I was checking on the kids, and I heard Vivi crying very quietly into her pillow, the way children cry when they've decided their feelings are an inconvenience. She was 11 then, too young to be that careful. I sat on the edge of her bed, and she turned over and looked at me, and she said something I will hear for the rest of my life. "I heard him on the phone, Mom." Her voice was barely there. "I know." She didn't say what she knew. She didn't have to. That was the moment. Not the perfume. Not the messages. The sight of my daughter trying to carry a grown man's secret so it wouldn't break me. I packed 3 bags that night. I told the kids we were going on an adventure to Grandma's. Colette, who was 5, thought we were going on vacation. It was already raining when we pulled out of the driveway. I thought the worst thing that could happen to us had already happened. I was wrong. The drive to my parents' house takes 20 minutes in good weather. That night, it took 40. The rain came down so hard the wipers couldn't keep up. Theo, who was 8, kept asking if we were almost there. Colette fell asleep with her cheek against the window. Vivi sat in the front seat and held my phone and read me the directions even though I knew the way, because she needed something to do with her hands. I pulled into my parents' driveway. The porch light was on. Every window glowed. I want you to picture this, because I've pictured it 10,000 times. I'm standing on the step with 3 children. The youngest is asleep against my shoulder. The rain is loud enough that I have to raise my voice. I'm not angry yet. I'm relieved. I'm thinking, finally, somewhere dry, family, home. My mother opened the door 6 inches. Not all the way. 6 inches. Enough to talk. Not enough to let us in. I told her, the short version, that Preston had been seeing someone, that I'd left, that I just needed a few nights, just until I could think. I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do. It closed. Not in shock. Indecision. "Ashley," she said. "It's late. The children are tired. You've made a very impulsive choice tonight, and you need to go home and try again." I said the rooms upstairs were empty. I said it was pouring. I said please. And from somewhere behind her, in the warm and the dry, I heard my brother's voice. Kyle. Easy. Amused. "She's being dramatic again," he said. "Don't let it turn into a whole thing." My father never came to the door at all. My mother looked at my children. She looked at the rain. And she said the sentence I told you about at the start. "The children need stability, not your hysterics. Go home." The door closed. The light stayed on. I stood there for a moment with the rain running down the back of my neck. And then I did the only useful thing I could think of. I got my kids back in the car. I turned the heat all the way up. And I held the wheel until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't know yet that the door hadn't closed on me because of who I was. It had closed because of what they owed. We spent that first night in a motel off the highway. It was the cheap kind, with a bedspread the color of an old bruise and a heater that rattled like it had something caught in its throat. The three of them slept in one bed. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the parking lot fill with rain. In the morning, Colette woke up and looked around the little room and asked, "Are we still on vacation?" I said, "Yes, baby." A little while longer. My phone buzzed at 7. I thought, for one foolish second, that it might be my mother, that she'd reconsidered, that she was sorry. It was a text. From her. I read it twice. "We did this for you. Go home and fix your family." I read it a third time. Then I did something I didn't fully understand at the time. I took a screenshot. I don't know why. Some quiet animal part of me knew I'd want it later. I didn't write back. Preston, meanwhile, was busy. He texted that morning too, and his message was a different kind of cold. "When you've calmed down, we'll talk about the kids. No court in the world hands children to a woman who's falling apart." There it was, the diagnosis becoming a threat. I want you to understand what those days did to my children, because they're the reason for everything that came after. Theo started wetting the bed again. He was 8, and he hadn't done that since he was 4, and every morning he'd wake up ashamed in a strange room. And I'd tell him it was okay, it was just the new place. And I'd wash the sheets in a coin laundry and fold them on a plastic chair while he watched cartoons on my phone. Vivi got too quiet. She started doing things a child shouldn't have to do. Reminding me to eat. Asking if we had enough money for groceries. Carrying it. Colette just kept asking when we were going home, and I kept not having an answer. After a week, I found a place we could afford. A small 2-bedroom rental in Milwaukee, on a street where the houses needed paint and nobody cared what your son-in-law did for a living. We didn't have much to put in it. A mattress I bought off a couple who were moving, 2 lamps from a thrift store, a kitchen table with one leg that wobbled until I folded a coaster under it. The kids picked their room, and I took the couch. And I told them it was because I liked the couch. And Vivi looked at me in a way that told me she knew it wasn't true, and had decided to let me have it. The first grocery trip, I stood in the cereal aisle doing math, and Theo asked for the kind with the cartoon on the box, and I said maybe next time. And he said okay so fast and so quietly that it broke something in me. An 8-year-old shouldn't learn to ask for less. I bought him the cereal. We ate rice for 2 days to make up for it. He never knew. The first night there, after the kids were asleep, I stood at the kitchen window. It was raining again. It rains a lot here in the winter. You stop noticing after a while, or you decide to. I thought about the porch light, the 6 inches of open door, my brother's voice from the warm. And something in me changed shape. It didn't snap. It hardened. I made myself a second promise that night, longer than the first. I would never knock on that door again. Not ever. I would build a door of my own and a roof of my own, and a life so solid that no one could call it impulsive. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked in an empty search bar. I typed 3 words. How to start? If your own family has ever picked someone else over you and called it love, tell me below. I'm listening. For the first few months, I just survived. I took a job at the front desk of a dental office, answering phones and scheduling cleanings. It paid enough to keep the lights on and not much more. I learned which days were slow. I learned to do the math on what we could spend before I let the kids order anything. There was a regular at the dental office, an older woman named Beatrice who came in every few months and always asked about my kids by name. One afternoon, she watched me reschedule 3 patients without losing my place, and she said, "You're too sharp for this desk, dear." I laughed it off. But it stayed with me, the way a kind word stays with you when you haven't heard many. The nights were the hard part. After the kids went down, the apartment got so quiet I could hear the refrigerator. I'd make coffee and open the laptop and try to remember which version of myself was the real one. The capable woman who could run a front desk in her sleep, or the fragile thing my husband had described to everyone we knew. Some nights I'd get a page into the coursework and the words would swim, and I'd put my head down on the table for just a minute, and the minute would turn into an hour, and I'd wake up with a crick in my neck and the coffee gone cold. I kept a sticky note on the laptop. 3 words, in my own handwriting. Watch me rise. On the nights I wanted to close the laptop and give up, I read it until I believed it again. But survival isn't a plan, and I'd promised myself a life, not a holding pattern. The idea came to me at a red light. I was driving home one gray afternoon and I passed a house with a sign in the yard. For sale. A woman in a blazer was standing on the steps with a clipboard talking to a young couple, and the couple had that look. That hopeful, terrified look of people standing in front of a door that might open for them. I'd been on the wrong side of a door that wouldn't open, and here was a woman whose entire job was helping people walk through. I didn't decide to become a broker that day, but I started paying attention. I learned that in Oregon, the license you start with is actually called a broker's license. Most people picture real estate agent, but here, that's the word. I learned you have to complete 150 hours of approved courses before you can even sit for the state exam. Real estate law, finance, contracts, the parts of the work nobody puts on a billboard. 150 hours felt like a mountain. I had a full-time job and 3 kids, and a rental with a heater that worked when it felt like it. So I climbed it in the only hours I had, the ones after bedtime. I met Marguerite at an open house I wandered into on a Saturday, mostly to see what the inside of this world looked like. She was the broker running it. Late 50s, silver hair pulled back, the kind of woman who's seen everything and stopped being impressed by most of it. I told her I was thinking about getting my license. I expected her to be polite and dismissive. Instead, she looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at a horse you're deciding whether to bet on, and she said, "This job doesn't need you to be perfect, honey. It needs you to show up. Over and over, when you don't feel like it. Can you do that?" I thought about a coin laundry at 6 in the morning, about folding sheets on a plastic chair. "Yes," I said. "Showing up is the only thing I'm good at." She laughed. She gave me her card. She told me which school wasn't a scam. So that became my life. Front desk by day, bedtime stories at night. And then, when the apartment went quiet, the kitchen table and a stack of course material and a cup of coffee I'd reheat twice. Vivi found me there one night around midnight, asleep with my cheek on a chapter about property finance. She put a blanket over my shoulders. She was 11. She didn't wake me. In the morning, I found her textbook open next to mine on the table, where she'd done her own homework so I wouldn't be studying alone. There were nights I wanted to quit. Nights the numbers didn't work, and Theo had a nightmare, and I hadn't slept, and the exam felt like a joke I was telling myself. On one of those nights, I made the mistake of going to a cousin's engagement party because I thought I could handle it. I was getting a drink when I heard Preston's name, and then mine from the next room. He wasn't there, but my brother was. Kyle, holding court, a glass in his hand. "She had a full breakdown," Kyle was saying. "Just packed up the kids and bolted. Preston's been a saint about it, trying to hold it together for those poor children." A breakdown. A saint. Poor children. I stood very still and let the words land. My face stayed calm. Inside, something I can only describe as a low, steady heat. I didn't say anything. I set down my drink. I drove home. And on the way, I said it out loud to the windshield, the way you tell yourself something you intend to keep. Let them talk. I had 150 hours to finish. The exam nearly broke me before I even sat down. In Oregon, you take it at a testing center, 2 sections, the national portion and the state portion, and you need at least a 75 on each. Miss one section by a point and you come back another day and pay again. I'd taken the courses. I'd passed the practice tests at the kitchen table, but the morning of the exam, sitting in my car in the parking lot, I almost couldn't make myself go in. Because here's what no one tells you about being told you're falling apart for long enough. You start to wonder if it's true. You start to flinch at your own reflection. A whole year of "she's not well" had gotten into me like damp into a wall. I went in anyway. I showed up. It's the only thing I'm good at. The questions blurred and then sharpened. Trust accounts, agency law, the math I'd done 100 times at midnight. I finished the national section, then the state. The screen does it instantly. You don't get to go home and wait. The result just appears. I sat there and made myself look. Pass. Both sections, pass. I walked out to my car and I didn't celebrate. Not at first. I just sat with my hands on the wheel. The same wheel I'd held while it shook on a rainy night a few months before, and I let myself breathe. Then I called Marguerite. She didn't even say congratulations. She said, "Good. Now the real work starts. Come see me Monday and we'll get your license hung at the firm." In Oregon, you can't work alone when you're new. You have to be associated with a principal broker, someone who supervises you, whose name your license lives under. Marguerite was a principal broker. She agreed to sponsor me. Her firm was called Crestline Realty. The first time I clipped on a name badge that said Ashley Whitfield, Crestline Realty, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at the office and barely recognized the woman wearing it. I want to be honest about the early days, because the truth is, they were humbling. I cold-called people who hung up on me. I sat at open houses for hours where nobody came, eating a granola bar, watching the rain, refreshing my phone. I got listings that fell apart. I drove buyers around all weekend and watched them choose another agent's house. There was one open house I'll never forget. It was January, cold and wet, and I'd put out balloons and baked cookies and stood in an empty living room for 4 hours. One person came. A man who wandered in, used the bathroom, took 2 cookies, and left without a word. I packed up the balloons in the dark and sat in my car and let myself cry for exactly the length of one song on the radio. Then I wiped my face and drove home and made dinner. That was the rule I made. You're allowed to fall apart for one song, then you keep going. I made cold calls from the office on my lunch breaks, working through lists of people whose listings had expired. Most hung up. One man told me to never call him again. I marked him off the list and dialed the next number, and the number after that. And on the 11th call, a woman said, "Actually, we have been thinking about selling. You make your luck on the 11th call." Nobody tells you that. But I showed up. Tuesday when I didn't feel like it. Saturday when I'd rather have slept. The way Marguerite said. My first real listing was a small house. Nothing fancy. The kind of place a young family stretches to afford. I learned how to stage a room with almost no money. I learned what to say and what to leave unsaid. A couple walked through on a Sunday, the wife already imagining curtains, and I saw it. That hopeful, terrified look. The people in front of a door that might open. While I was learning all of that, I learned something else. Something that rearranged the whole story I'd been telling myself about the night they left us in the rain. It came from my Aunt Maeve, my mother's younger sister, the one decent voice in that family, the one who'd quietly slipped me cash that first month and told me not to tell anyone. We were having coffee, and I said the thing that had been eating me, that I still didn't understand it, that I could almost understand the disappointment, the lecture, the "you're being impulsive," but not the door, not the rain, not the grandchildren on the step. Maeve set down her cup. She looked tired. "Sweetheart," she said, "your father can't say no to that man. Not anymore, not since the money." I asked what she meant. She told me what no one in the family said out loud, that the rescue, 3 years back, had never really ended. That Preston hadn't given them money. He'd lent it, in a way that kept them tied to him. That every holiday, every favor, every time my parents needed to choose, there was a quiet weight on the scale that said, "Remember who saved you." "How much?" I asked. Maeve just shook her head. "Enough that your father stopped sleeping for a while. Enough that he signed something he doesn't like to talk about." She turned her coffee cup in a slow circle. "He likes to remind them, you know, not in words. Just a little comment at Thanksgiving. A little, after all I've done." Your mother eats it up. She'd rather owe a hero than admit they nearly lost everything. I thought about all the times I'd watched my father go quiet when Preston spoke. I'd read it as respect. It was something closer to a leash. "They didn't shut that door because they thought you were unstable," Maeve said. "They shut it because he asked them to, and they couldn't afford to tell him no." I sat there for a long time after she left. It changed everything. The cruelty had never been about me at all. I'd spent months wondering what was so wrong with me that my own mother would leave my children in a storm. The answer was nothing. The answer was a debt with my husband's name on it. I drove home that night, and for the first time I wasn't carrying shame. I was carrying something clearer and colder. They didn't shut the door because I was the broken one. They shut it because they were the bought ones. And that I could work with. There's a moment when you're climbing out of a hole, when you stop looking down at the hole and start looking up at the light. For us, that moment came in the fall. It started with Theo. He'd been a ghost for months. Quiet at school, quiet at home, flinching at loud noises. The bedwetting had stopped, but the watchfulness hadn't. He was a small boy braced for the next bad thing. I signed him up for a youth soccer league, mostly because it was cheap, and it got him outside. He didn't want to go. He stood at the edge of the field the first 3 practices like a kid waiting to be told he didn't belong. And then one Saturday, in a game that meant nothing to anyone but us, the ball came loose in front of the goal, and my quiet, braced little boy ran at it and kicked it in. I have never heard a sound come out of Theo like the one that came out of him then. He turned around looking for me in the little crowd of parents, and he found me, and his whole face was light. That night he talked at dinner. Really talked. About the goal. About a kid named Drummond on his team. About whether they'd win next week. My son came back to me on a muddy field in October, and I will be grateful for that field for the rest of my life. Then there was Vivi, my oldest, who'd carried so much, who'd been too quiet for too long, had quietly auditioned for something at school. The State Honor Orchestra. The good one. The one you have to earn. She played violin, and she'd kept practicing through everything. In the corner of a small rental, with a mute on the string so she wouldn't wake her brother and sister. She made it. She came home with the letter and put it on the table without a word, the way she does, and waited for me to read it. And when I looked up at her, she said, very simply, "The lady said I earned it. The lady said I earned it. My daughter, the one my husband told the world had been ruined by my impulsiveness, earned her place in the best orchestra in the state with her own 2 hands." Colette started sleeping through the night. She stopped asking when we were going home, because, somewhere in there, the small rental in Milwaukee had become home. And in the middle of all of it, I closed my first big sale. It was a family that had been turned down everywhere. Their credit was thin. Their offer kept getting passed over for cash buyers. 3 kids. Like me. A mother who looked like she was bracing for one more no. Her name was Genevieve. And she'd been turned down so many times she'd stopped letting herself want the houses. She'd walk through a place with her arms crossed, keeping her face flat, the way you do when hope has cost you too much. I knew that walk. I'd done it myself, through cheaper rooms. The first lender said no. The second said no. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight. the way I had during the courses, and I went through the file line by line until I understood the whole picture. And then I found a third lender, a small local one, and I made the case for the family instead of the numbers. They said yes. The seller had 2 higher offers, both cash. So I wrote a letter. Not about money, about a mother and 3 kids and a porch swing one of the children had already named. I sat with Genevieve while she read the seller's reply and watched her hand come up to her mouth. I worked that deal harder than anything in my life. I found a lender who'd actually look at the whole picture. I wrote the kind of offer letter that makes a seller see people instead of numbers. And when the keys went into that mother's hand on the front step of a house that was finally hers, she cried, and I had to look away because I knew exactly what it meant to stand in front of a door and have it open. My signs started going up around the metro. Ashley Whitfield, Crestline Realty, a few of them in Lake Oswego, on streets near my parents' house. But here's the thing. My family didn't know any of it. To them, I was still the woman who'd had a breakdown and run off with the kids. They had no idea I'd gotten licensed. No idea about the orchestra. No idea about the goal or the closing or the signs with my name on them. I knew, because Preston told me, in one of the few texts I still answered. He'd heard something secondhand. "Playing house with a real estate license now?" he wrote. "Cute. Doesn't change what you are." I looked at that message for a while. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went to watch my daughter practice. He had no idea what was coming. Neither did I exactly, but it was coming. The threat got sharper in December, almost exactly a year after the rain. Preston's lawyer talk escalated. He started saying the word custody in his texts, casually, the way you'd mention the weather. He let me know that my parents would be happy to testify about how you fell apart. He had it all lined up. The unstable mother, the steady father, the grandparents who'd watched it all. It should have scared me more than it did. A year before, it would have. But I'd been keeping every text. I had a daughter on the honor list and a son scoring goals, and a closing under my belt, and a roof I paid for myself. I'd also done something quietly over those months, without quite admitting why. I'd kept things. The screenshot from my mother. Preston's texts. The ones where the word custody sat next to a casual little emoji. I never planned to use them in a courtroom. I just had a feeling, the same animal feeling I'd had in the motel, that one day someone was going to insist on a version of events, and I'd want the truth where I could reach it. And the children, without my asking, had started to talk. Small things, at bedtime. Things their father had said. Things he'd told them to say. I didn't push. I just listened, and I remembered. And a picture formed that no one in that family would have wanted me to have. A man can call you unstable all he wants. The trouble starts for him when the evidence is standing right there, thriving. Then the invitation arrived. It came on heavy cream paper with gold lettering, my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, a party at the house, friends, family, the whole social world of Lake Oswego invited to celebrate 4 decades of Gordon and Patrice Crawford. The invitation was addressed to my children, not to me. The note inside said the grandchildren were most welcome and that I was, of course, free to drop them off. Drop them off. At the house with the door that didn't open. I almost threw it away. And then I understood what it really was. A few days later, I found out the rest. Preston was going to be there. He'd arranged to bring the kids himself, as the devoted father. He was going to walk into that party with my children on his arms and perform, in front of every person whose opinion mattered to my parents, the role of the long-suffering dad holding it together while his unstable ex-wife stayed away. The anniversary wasn't a party. It was a stage. He was going to use it to set the story in stone, in front of witnesses, and finish the job of erasing me. I sat with that for one night. Then I called Marguerite. not for business, just to hear a steady voice, and she said something I already knew, but needed said out loud. "Honey, you don't have to attend their war. But if you don't, they'll write the history without you in it." She was right. He wanted an audience. So did I. I would go to their party. I would bring nothing but the truth and 3 thriving children. And I would walk in through the front door. The night of the anniversary, it was raining. Of course it was. It always rains here in the winter. I drove to Lake Oswego with the wipers going, and I thought about the last time I'd made this drive, with 3 kids and 3 bags and nowhere to land. The house was lit up like a ship. There were valets. There were maybe 30 guests inside, dressed up, holding glasses, the air full of the particular warmth of people who feel safe. I parked on the street. I sat for a moment. Then I walked up the steps, past the porch light that was on, the way it's always on, and through the front door that someone this time had left open. The room shifted when I came in. Conversations dipped. Eyes moved. My mother saw me from across the room and her smile froze halfway. My father set down his drink, and Preston, who'd been holding court near the fireplace with Colette on his hip and Theo at his side, turned and gave me the warmest, most concerned smile you've ever seen. "Ash," he said, loud enough for the people nearby. "You came. That's so good. How are you holding up?" "How are you holding up?" In front of everyone, the first move on the board. I said I was fine. I said it quietly. I went and kissed my children, and I felt Colette's arms lock around my neck and stay there. For the next hour, I watched a masterwork. Preston moved through that party like a man being brave. He'd touch someone's arm and lower his voice, and you could see the words. "So hard on the kids. Doing my best." We don't talk about her health. He never said anything you could repeat back as cruel. He just laid down a fog, and in the fog, every person in that room arranged me into the shape he'd given them. The poor, unwell mother who couldn't keep it together. I watched him work one couple in particular, old friends of my parents. He crouched down to Theo's level and ruffled his hair and said, loud enough to carry, "You doing okay, buddy? You know I'm always here, right?" And Theo, who'd scored a goal and come back to life on a muddy field, just stared at him, because my son knew exactly who was always there and who wasn't. The couple watched the boy not answer and read it as damage. Preston straightened up and gave them a small, sad smile that said, "You see what I'm dealing with." A woman I half recognized cornered me by the food and patted my arm. "You're so brave to come," she said. "He's been a rock. Just a rock." I thanked her. There was nothing else to say that wouldn't sound exactly like the unwell woman insisting she was well. I refilled a glass of water I wasn't drinking, just to have somewhere to put my hands. I watched my mother laugh at one of Preston's jokes. I watched my father avoid my eyes across the room, the way he'd avoided them through a 6-inch gap in a door a year before. And I waited. I'd learned to wait. The man was building something tall and shaky, and I only had to let him keep stacking. My parents glowed beside him. My mother kept her hand on his shoulder. My father told a story about how Preston had once driven 2 hours to fix his fence, and everyone laughed. Kyle was there too, a few drinks in, loose and loud. He drifted past me once and muttered, "Bold of you to show up," with a little smile. And I said nothing. That's the part people don't understand. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't pull anyone aside to plead my case. I'd learned a long time ago that the unwell woman who insists she's well only sounds more unwell. So I let him perform. I held my glass. I watched. But the cracks were already there, if you knew where to look. Colette wouldn't leave my side. She kept her face pressed into my shoulder and watched her father with an expression I didn't like, a wariness no 5-year-old should wear. And Vivi was watching too. My oldest, in a nice dress, standing very still near the bookshelf, taking in the whole room with those steady eyes. It was an aunt of my father's who lit the fuse, completely by accident. "And how are the children doing in school?" she asked the room, beaming. Before anyone could deliver the rehearsed answer, another guest spoke up. A neighbor who'd heard something. "Oh, didn't your granddaughter make some big orchestra? The state one?" The room turned to Vivi. My mother's smile flickered. Preston's eyes moved to me, just for a second, and I saw a flash of something there. Calculation. Because the thriving child didn't fit the story of the ruined home. "She did," I said. Simple. Just that. She earned it herself. Preston recovered fast. He raised his glass. He'd had a bit to drink himself by then, and it made him expansive, generous, sure of himself. He tapped the side of his glass and the room quieted for the devoted son-in-law's toast. "To Gordon and Patrice," he said. 40 years. And to family. Real family is the people who hold things together when everything's trying to fall apart, who keep a roof over each other's heads. I've tried to be that. For these kids. For all of you." He raised his glass higher. That was his mistake. "To holding it together," Preston said. And he smiled at me when he said it. A soft, public, generous smile. The kind that says, everyone can see what a good man I'm being. Even when one person decides to walk away from her family. The room was warm with agreement. Glasses lifted. And in the quiet right after, in that little gap before everyone drank, a small voice cut clean across the room. It was Colette. She looked up from my shoulder at her father, her face screwed up in confusion, and she said the thing that 5-year-olds say, the thing that comes out before anyone can stop it. "Daddy," she said, "you said we have to say Mommy's brain is sick, so we can come live with you." The room went still. You could hear the rain on the windows. Preston's smile didn't fall right away. He laughed, a warm, easy laugh, and waved a hand. "Oh, kids, they repeat the funniest things." He looked around the room, gathering them back. "This, honestly, is what I've been dealing with. She's been coaching them. This is the instability I'm talking about." He turned it around that fast. The truth came out of his own daughter's mouth, and he reached down and made it my crime. A few people nodded, uncertain, wanting to believe him because believing him was comfortable. And that's when my Vivi stepped away from the bookshelf. She walked into the middle of that warm, frozen room, 12 years old in her nice dress, and she stood very straight, and she spoke in a voice that did not shake. "No one coached me," she said. She looked at her father. "Not afraid. Just done. I heard you on the phone with Sloan, lots of times. And you told us, you sat us down in the kitchen and told us, that if anyone asked, we had to say Mom was sick in her head. You said the judge would let us live with you if we said it. I'm not sick, Colette's not sick, and Mom's not sick. You are a liar." Nobody breathed. A 12-year-old's word, calm and clear, is a different thing than a 5-year-old's. You can't wave it away as repeating. You can't call it coaching. It just sits in the room, true and terrible. I reached into my coat pocket. I'd brought one thing with me that night, and now I took it out. My phone. I opened the screenshot I'd taken almost exactly a year before, in a motel with a rattling heater, and I read it aloud into the silence, in the flattest voice I owned. "We did this for you," I read. "Go home and fix your family." I looked up at my mother. "You sent me that the morning after you left your grandchildren in the rain. I've wondered for a year why you'd do it." I paused. Now I think I understand. My mother's face had gone the color of paper. And then I did the thing I'd been not doing all night. The thing I'd been not doing for years, really. I stopped being the woman they talked about. I straightened up, and I let them all look at me, and I spoke for myself. "For a year," I said, "every one of you has gone around telling people who Ashley Whitfield is, the unstable one, the one who fell apart, the one who walked away from her family. I let that sit. I'm Ashley Whitfield. I'm a licensed broker. I have my own clients and my own home that I pay for myself. That's my daughter who just told you the truth, and she's first chair material in the State Honor Orchestra. That's my son who scored his first goal this fall. They are not ruined. They are thriving, because I got them out. I turned to Preston. You didn't lose your family. You got caught. And the rest of you. I looked at my parents, at Kyle. You didn't shut that door on me because I was unstable. You shut it because you owed him. Because he's been holding that loan over this family for 3 years, and when he asked you to choose, you couldn't afford to choose your own daughter. The silence after that was total. My father had both hands flat on the table, his head down. My mother had a hand over her mouth. I looked around the room and made myself see it. The neighbor who'd toasted a minute ago, his glass now lowered, his face working through a year of dinner party gossip and rearranging all of it. The great aunt who'd asked about school, blinking. A cousin who'd always been kind to me, who'd believed the story because the story was easy, now looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time in a year. Vivi had come to my side. She slipped her hand into mine. She wasn't crying. She just held on. Colette had gone quiet against my shoulder, the way children do when they sense they've said something enormous, frightened of the size of it. I put my hand on her back. You did nothing wrong, I told her, quiet, just for her. You told the truth. That's all. Theo stood a little apart, watching his father, and for the first time all night he didn't look braced. He looked like a boy who'd just figured out he'd been right about something the grown-ups kept telling him he was wrong about. For one long moment nobody moved. And then, Preston lost it. The mask, the warm and generous mask he'd worn for years, came off all at once. His face went red and ugly, and his voice climbed, and he said the truest thing he'd said in his life, because rage always tells the truth. After everything I did for this family, he shouted, I kept a roof over your parents' heads. They'd be in a 1-bedroom apartment if it weren't for me, and this is the thanks. He stopped. Too late. He heard it himself. He'd just told the whole room, in his own voice, exactly what I'd accused him of, that he'd bought my parents' loyalty and held the receipt. Every person there understood in that second that the steady, generous man had been running the family on leverage and a lie. Kyle, half drunk and panicking, tried to save it. Come on, it's not like that. Preston was just... And then he heard how it sounded, defending the man who funded his free room, and he shut his mouth. It was Aunt Maeve who moved first. She set down her glass, and she crossed the room, and she came and stood next to me and put her arm around my shoulders, facing the rest of them. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just stood with me in front of everyone, and that small act broke the spell completely. A neighbor took a step back from Preston. A cousin looked at my mother and shook her head. The warmth that had filled that room an hour ago was just gone, and what was left was the cold light of people seeing clearly for the first time. If you've ever had to walk away from family to protect your kids, or yourself, I hope you hear me right now. What boundaries saved your life? Tell me below. I didn't stay to watch it all come down. That's not how the story ends, with me standing over the wreckage. I'd promised myself a life, not a war. I gathered my children. Colette's arms went right back around my neck. Theo took my hand, and Vivi, my brave, steady oldest, looked up at me. And the words she chose are the ones I'll keep forever. Can we go home now? She said. Home. Our home. The little rental in Milwaukee with the heater that works when it feels like it. Not theirs. Ours. We walked out the front door, past the porch light, into the rain, and this time we had somewhere to go. Here's what happened after. The short version, because the long version is just an ordinary life, which is its own kind of victory. I don't speak to my parents anymore. My mother called twice. I didn't answer. I think part of her wanted forgiveness, and I've made my peace with the fact that I'm not the one who can give it. Some doors, once they close on a child in a storm, don't get to open again just because the weather changed. Kyle is still in his childhood bedroom as far as I know. Some people never run out of being between things. Preston's threats about custody dried up fast. It's hard to argue a mother is unstable when her children are flourishing, and a room full of witnesses heard you coach them to lie. His standing in that little world, the world he'd spent years cultivating, never recovered. He'd built his whole life on what people thought of him. I just let them think clearly for one night. And me? I kept showing up. Tuesday when I didn't feel like it. Saturday when I'd rather have slept. The business grew, the way things grow when you tend them. More listings, more closings, more families standing on front steps with that hopeful, terrified look, watching a door open. The morning after the party, the rain had finally stopped. I drove the kids to school, and our route took us through Lake Oswego, past the streets where my parents live. And there, on a front lawn 2 blocks from their house, was one of my signs. Clean and white in the gray morning. Ashley Whitfield, Crestline Realty. Vivi saw it from the back seat. She didn't say anything. She just reached up and squeezed my shoulder once. They never opened that door for us. So I built one with my name on it, all over the very town where they live, and I never once looked back.